Hi, we got a few questions on link objects or association classes. So we're gonna dive into those right now. This is a typical association class. It is on a many-to-many association. Let's draw this in a new diagram. We're gonna just move these things. Person, house, lease contract. Not move them. We're gonna view them in a separate diagram. So I create a new diagram. I open that diagram. I find what I was looking for, the house class. The person class. As I dragged this on, all the associations associated with these two classes are also drawn, and since the association class is part of this association, it was implicitly added to my view. This is of course just what I want now, so that's okay. If I didn't want it, I would mark it and press delete. Remember, if we press delete, we just remove it from the diagram, and Control Delete would delete it from the model completely. This association I'm not interested to show in this diagram, so I press delete. Not Control Delete, because that would remove it, and I don't want that. I just want to that would remove it from the model. I just want to remove it from the diagram. Delete. All right. Let's look at this. What happens? The house has many tenants that are of class person. The person has many rented apartments that are of class house. In every relationship that is many-to-many like this, we have the ability to add a association clause like this. It's added with the dotted line tool, this one. And let's check the tooltip, drag out new association clause connection. So if I press that one, I can find association, but I had one already, so I can remove the association clause by clicking the association line, find in the property inspector the class that is selected, and I can choose to have no association clause. When I do this, the dotted line is removed. I can set it back by choosing it, but the dotted line would not get there because it is only drawn when added to the diagram if it is association. So a better way now to get it to show, I can remove this from view. I can remove this from view and say right click, introduce, removed. That ended up outside the screen. Still. Introduce, removed. Pick from available. I'm gonna remove this one as well, just to make it easier for me. Introduce, pick from available. owned houses, rented apartments. You can't see it, but I see it. I don't know how to get this on screen. So now it added the thing like this. So now we were back where we started from. That was a roundabout way. Sorry about that. Like that. So these are the association ends: rented apartments and tenants. And this is the association. So on the association I see the ends: rented apartments and tenants. If I click one, I only see this association end and the other one. And I can see the name property to tenants. And if I click the other one, I see the name property, rented apartments. But what about this? What actually happens is there is an implicit link available in OCL for us, so that we can go from the house to the lease contracts, because the lease contracts are often quite good to use. It has important information in this case: apartment number and end date and rent, etc. So let's see how a view model that started in house and say that it had all houses. So I would add a nested with multi-links house all instances. Okay, so this will be a list where I have all the houses, and for a certain house I can say that I want to show the street number. And for the selected house, I can see that I have a few multi-link options. Is that on screen for you guys? I don't know. The tenants, which is this one, but also the lease contract, which is that one. All right. So if I add a list of those lease contracts, self-lease contract, it ended up a bit misplaced, but let's say that for each house, each selected house, I have a list of lease contracts. So let's add a few columns to that grid, that apartment number and the rent. So what we've learned is that there's an implicit link to get here. Why is that link called lease contract? Good question. Actually, when we stand on the association and we fold down the one called tenants, we have something we call inner link name and link role name. and these are both to default. And default means that it's gonna get a name based on the class it's pointing to, basically. And remember that the one we used was called lease contract. Why was it called lease contract? Well, it turns out it's the link role name. So if I were to change this to the lease contracts, the OCL editor would say that, whoa, you used the name lease contract, I don't even know what that is. But the lease contracts, that I know. So let's remove that one and type the lease contracts. And that's a collection of lease contract. So this is actually a better naming of the lease contract list. So instead of the default. But that was the when I point at this end tenants, I can really go this way with the link role name, the lease contracts. But once here, I might want to continue to go up this way and go that way. Let's see. So I'm in a lease contract. Gonna add a generic empty column just to get an OCL position to write in and see roles. There's one called tenants person, and that one, the tenants, I'm gonna use that one. That's just and that points out one person. But maybe we think that that is a good name. It's actually quite okay name, but just for the sake of arguments, we're gonna change the inner link name. This is called the inner link. So the inner link name, let's call it the tenant of the lease. And if I have done that and check this OCL again, it says, oh, I don't know anything about tenants from lease contract, but I do know the tenant of the lease. So that's the new name that we gave it. How annoying is that? Like that. So what we have learned is, of course, we can go straight to the tenants. It will be a list of persons, but we can also go to the link role name to the lease contract. In this case, we called it the lease contracts. And then we are here. And then we might want to go up here and to the specific person associated with this lease contract. And that would be called the tenant of the lease. Okay. So, important things with link objects or association clauses are that they are lifetime controlled by the framework. This is really a part of the UML standard, that whenever a person is associated with the house in this association, namely the person gets another rented apartments, if we add a house to the person's rented apartments, a lease contract will implicitly be created. We can't avoid it. That is what the link clause does. Whenever there's a new object added in this end of the association, a new object, link object, is created in of this clause. And the same is if we had a house and were to add a person as a tenant, it would create a lease contract. So that means that we can always trust that there will be a lease contract when we have designed it this way. Okay. But if that is the case, that it is lifetime controlled by the existence of this association, how can we then delete or remove a lease contract? Instead, we should remove the person as a tenant. If we remove a person as a tenant, the lease contract associated with that person will be removed. And vice versa. If a person would remove a rented apartment, the lease contract would be destructed. Logically, the association clause could be simulated this way. If we have a multi-link of lease contracts that points out one house, and we also had a multi-link from person to lease contracts that has one person. This is more or less equivalent to this association clause. But this implementation of the same concept does not offer the lifetime control that this implementation does. This is often how we see association clauses done in databases. But the databases seldom offer the lifetime control. Actually, when we do it with an association clause, we cover a lot of ground with very few concepts. This tells the reader of the model that the lease contracts are implicitly created whenever there's a house and a person in association. And lets you set the specific attributes on that. It's a real strong concept of modeling and abstraction. So we're gonna try this out. I'm gonna remove this column and add an action to show this. Just a dummy action, add global action for show. And then I got that this action will be created. Okay. Save this and see why it's since I changed the inner link names, I will need to change the places where I use them. So this could be a good example of so we are on a lease contract, but we want the tenant of the lease self instead, and we had more errors. So instead of calling it that, it was called the lease contracts. So I corrected those. Start prototyping. I bring up our simple prototype and see there's an exception, null value in link object, because we loaded a file where they were missing data since we changed it. In the XML file we don't evolve the data, so if we change names we can get strange results like this, but the XML file is mainly suitable for prototyping data, so that's not a problem for us. We can just clean that up. So I cleaned up the file off screen. I basically recreated the file. So this was the one we created. We can see that we see just the street number and the apartment number. That might be a little vague. Can we add something more so that we get some context? The street name. Model refresh view, the street name. If I point at this one, I can see that I have a few lease contracts, but on each lease contract I can add a generic column following to the tenant of the lease and the full name. Like that, and I'm going to call that full name. Like that. So if I would want to remove one of these lease contracts, how would I go about that? Well, let's say that we want to add a button. To remove a lease contract, add, and this time I'm gonna add a generic column here, and I'm gonna check is action, and it ended up there. I'm gonna add it here. Don't need to be that big, like that. Delete picked lease. So which one is the currently picked lease? I know they are in this list, lease contract list, so there should be a variable called vCurrent lease contract list. vCurrent lease contract list. And let's try with delete. Remember the thing I said that it shouldn't work because this is actually lifetime controlled by the framework. Model refresh, select this one and delete. And as you saw, that went just fine. So actually I remembered wrong. It's okay to delete the link objects, because what we will do is to clean up these two associations. You can do delete on this. What I was referring to is that we cannot remove things from the inner link. So let's try that next, because this has no possibility to live without the house and the person. So the house and the person is the reason for this existence, for its existence. So this was okay, but I'm gonna undo. We had that one, right? Undo. So Control Z, cancel on everything. Discard changes, yes. So let's head back to the view model, and if I right click here and insert row, I get a new in the grid. Everything is moved down one step for me, so that's a convenient way to get more space. So I don't have to move everything by hand. But I'm gonna copy this action, Control C, Control V, remove from inner link. This is what shouldn't be possible. So from instead the selected house, vCurrent all house, this is the selected house, vCurrent is 1, the current one, and don't confuse this with vSelected all house, that contains all houses that are selected. So basically when I do this, hold Control down and select another one. Can't do that because we are in edit mode here. When I do this, I have multiple houses selected, and they are all in the vSelected in the vSelected all house collection of houses. But we just want the current house, the currently focused house. So that's in vCurrent all house, like that. And the inner link that we gave a name, explicit name, the lease contracts. The lease contracts. And we can try to remove And here we could use the currently focused lease contract, vCurrent lease contract list. So that's the one that is vCurrent in this list. So this would be illegal if what I say is correct. Now they are on the same spot. I'm gonna move this one here, remove from inner link, head back over here, model refresh, show the view model again. Now this one is selected, and now that one is also, this one is vCurrent for all house, and this is vCurrent for lease contract list. Remove from inner link, error. List of link objects is read only. List of link object is read only. That was what I was going for to show you. So that is not allowed because we can't remove things in this implicit link. Instead, we would need to remove this one from this link. So if we were to rectify this, let's do yet another copy. Remove from correct link. We could use the same vCurrent all house, but then it should be the role to tenants. And from here we want to remove the current lease contract, but that will not be correct because that's of the wrong type. It expects a tenant, so we need to follow the inner link up to the tenant of the lease. Now we have the tenant of the lease in the tenants collection. So the buttons ended up on top of each other when I copied. I'm going to move it here. So now I'm removing one of these from the selected of those and selected of those, following the inner link to here. Inner link name, the tenant of the lease, that name, and the link role name, that name. So there's an implicit name here and one here. I show these in the second grid, but in order to delete this one by removing, I need to remove one of these from this link. Not really that confusing once you get the hang of it. Model refresh. So I picked that one and I picked this one, and now I'm gonna remove from correct link, and then it disappears. And what happens is that since one of these objects are removed from this link, this one has no, one of these loses its right to exist, so it is destroyed by the framework. Get some warnings because they should have apartment numbers. Yeah, that's okay. The ones missing apartment numbers were these that, or in the other ones, these had. Okay, so quite an in-depth check on association clauses and how they work. Let me know if you have further questions and we will dive into those as well. Thank you.